Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Room podcast. And I am so incredibly tired. I'm not trying to be one of those people who is like, I just got so much going on in my life and I'm so busy. But when I tell you, it's crazy. Like there's so much, like I'm so tired. And it's not one of those things where it's like, I'm on the road and I'm doing what I love. No, I'm drained. I'm tired. Okay, I'm tired. I have tried to finish. My goal for next year actually is to really finish the books that I read. Like I always manage to get to maybe chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 8 if I'm lucky, and just pivot. And at this point, there's something else on my mind, or there's a new observation, or culture has pivoted, and I'm really trying to stay up on my investigative, journalism, which is very much self-proclaimed. But yeah, so it shifts, right? Right now, I'm trying, my goal is, it's only 248 pages, but my goal is to finish 1,000 Ways to Die, and it talks about gun violence. I think his name is Adam, or last name is Adams. I'm looking forward to finishing that. I really tried to read, let me see, this book is Robert Jones, Is White Too Long? And it just talks about the origins of white supremacy within Christianity. I felt like that was very important for culture, especially where we are right now. Could not finish that one. I can honestly say great. It's very contextual, but sometimes, as you know, if you're reading nonfiction, the academia, right? The scholarly research of it all, right? Bevy of that, it just can be kind of boring. So I would definitely say it is not very much interesting read. I did buy Sabrina Strings, The Death of Romance. She talks about Black women and so forth. But for the first time, right, I don't typically do this, but I actually read the introduction. And in reading her introduction, she, is a sociologist and all the things, right? She speaks about how she's queer. She speaks about how, she's kind of sharing this from her own lessons and observations. She gives the example of how she was dating this white guy and he didn't want to support her and her Black rights movement, right? As she was advocating for Black people when they were doing blackface on her college campus, right? As a community leader. And her white partner at the time did not want to support her in essentially defending that injustice. And so she kind of, puts a spin on that and talks about how, she was fetishized for her hair and all these different things. And you guys, I wrote a piece on Medium, and I think it is so important for everybody to read. Okay. It was written maybe about 2 years ago, at a time where we could be a little bit more vocal and be more honest, right, in our observations, especially in regards to sensitive topics like, Loving versus Virginia or something, right? The interracial dating. Okay. So anyway, I wrote a piece and I said how regret resurfaces after the choice to marry interracially, right? So when you are young, right, and maybe not even just necessarily youthful in the sense of your age and, maybe just where you are in your life, right? When you don't really have the awareness of what has taken place within Black history, you are going to find yourself really out there immersed in the world, as though it is a bed of daisies. Okay. It's a field of daisies, and you are just going to find yourself really dilly-dallying, living the oblivion, right? That's what youth is, right? You're just not really privy to all the woes and the ills and the injustices of the world, right? When you're young, you just don't know what you don't know. And so a lot of people make the choice to marry interracially, and it gets complicated. Right? They make the choice without the racial awareness. And I say this all the time. I think it's important for you guys to really sit with this. A lot of times, right, depending on the context, depending on where you are, right, a lot of times in order to be integrated within white spaces, you do oftentimes have to forego your Blackness. And what I mean when I say forego your Blackness, I'm talking about foregoing your consciousness in terms of what has taken place within this country, right? You cannot typically enter into these spaces with this awareness of who you are. Because if you enter into the space with the awareness of who you are and you stand as the 10,000, right, as Maya Angelou, has stated, right, then you are going to carry yourself with this level of awareness where your presence speaks before you even say anything, right? You can enter into a room with white people and you're not even in there on your sojourner truth, right? You're not declaring that you are a woman. You're not, but you are just simply existing, and you're standing tall, and your chin is up, and you're not standing like somebody's doing you a favor, right? Like, you're not here to serve. You're not here. You know what I mean? That disrupts the psyche, and I would even argue maybe on some spiritual level, individuals who have seen you in a certain way, who have certain expectations for you. So when you carry yourself in that way, you're not always going to be accepted in white spaces, and it's not because of anything that you're doing, right? This is not me, pledging an allegiance to arrogance or pride or anything like that. No, I'm talking about just sheer confidence, right? Knowing who you are, right? Being somebody who's educated. You're not here, like I said, because somebody's doing you a favor, right? Typically, if you are in these spaces, I don't care if you are the only white person in these spaces, you absolutely deserve to be there, right? And so when you carry yourself with that level of awareness, your presence speaks before anything else does, right? And so people can't seem to understand why you are the African American who's in this space, or that they have encountered for the first time, perhaps, who is not cowering, right? Who is not sitting here seeking, an aim to please, right? And again, this is not for everyone. I do think that, as much as this plight is continuous, right, in the lives of African Americans and within our culture and in this society and in this country, rather, especially as they are seeking to undo so much of the progress that we have made, which is continuous, right? You'll see this time and time again within our culture. First, it was a matter of, bombings and lynchings and all these really, really horrible things. We were, freed from slavery, and then there were laws that were put in place, right? The Fugitive Slave Act, all these different things. Well, that's actually different. I'm sorry. That was before emancipation. But so all of these things have been put in place to keep us from progressing. And so today, here we are, and you talk about the element of like free speech, right, within the Constitution, and what that really means, and who is allowed to have free speech, right? I was listening to this on the New York Times. Or actually, no, I'm sorry. I think it was Code Switch with Gene Dumby. And maybe it wasn't Gene Dumby. I think it was Code Switch with one of the other hosts on Code Switch. It's NPR's podcast. And they just really spoke about how, they spoke about the origins of it and what that really means, and, really getting into what freedom of speech is, right? So it was a great podcast episode for anybody who's wanting to know, what is the context of that. But what I found to be so incredibly interesting about it was just how, we're just living in a day and age where you can clearly see that typically those who have free speech are persons of power, right? Great influential power, great economic power. They are the ones who, are able to have free speech. Everybody else is being punished for that, right? I think it was the very first, I think it was a Black woman. I don't want to say the very first, but she was one of the first, I think, a while ago, who came online. I think she made a comment about therapy and people needing to go to therapy, and she lost her job for that, right? We know that there's been other surgeons. Well, this isn't free speech, but that's different. So anyway, I was going to give the example of the doctor who was dancing in the OR room. She lost her license and things like that. And then here we are today, and there's other, white doctors doing the same thing, and they haven't lost their licenses. So, there's always going to be injustice there. But my point is, we often enter into these communities without this level of awareness, right? And so I just think it's important for you guys to know that. I just think it's important, especially today, because we're just living in a day and age where I think for a lot of young people, it is easier, right? And that's the beautiful thing about progress, right? Especially in the lives of African American people. The harder we work, it gets better for each and every generation. And so the generation that's upcoming, they're really reaping the hard work of that, right? I tell you guys all the time, I remember being at work as a young Black woman, I was young, I was fly, I was fabulous, and I had long nails, and it was a part of my self-expression. It was creative, and I dealt with a lot of racial discrimination, right? A lot of side eyes and snickering. And this was only in 2018. You know what I mean? So here it is today, through my resistance, right? I'm not going to say my resistance but just through Black women's resistance in totality to say, hey, no, this is who I am. You know what I mean? I'm still going to show up to work with my long nails in 2018 because this is me. You know what I mean? And just through our resistance over time, right? That's just one example, we make it easier for the next generation. And so here it is, you have this younger generation, and they just really don't know what they don't know. And I think because it is easier, they don't really have that pressing, that chastening, that, they don't have to really develop that tenacity to really reckon with where we are today in reality. You know what I mean? They don't have to develop that tenacity to reckon with the responsibility that they have, right? And the responsibility that we all have as African Americans of each generation to push the needle a little bit further, to say, hey, this is our stuff too, right? We deserve to be here as well. So for them, it's like, well, we're all in this together, right? Never before have I seen so many, not just interracial couples, but so many, mingling of friend groups, right? And it's not to say that I'm bitter or angry. Absolutely not, right? In my real life, I'm a very open, very compassionate, very empathetic person, right? So I understand that, sometimes having these conversations can feel a bit divisive, but that's not my intention, right? But I also am at a point in my life where, hey, sometimes, what I found is just with that with that knowledge and with that level of awareness, sometimes it doesn't always, necessarily invite you into certain spaces, right? Or sometimes you don't always feel comfortable being in certain spaces because of the behaviors, right? Because maybe you don't have that carefree attitude, right? Because you are bracing yourself for the next jab, or, somebody simply trying you, right? Or maybe, for me, sometimes you find yourself in a space where you give leeway, and then here comes the AAV. You know what I mean? And it's like, oh, you want to use words like ratchet. And if it's a gay white male, I found that sometimes, it kind of becomes a thing where it's like sis or girl. And it's like, whoa, what are we doing here? What are we doing? You know what I mean? And so I think it's important that you know this. And I think it's important that you choose what I don't know. I think for so many of us, as we've integrated in this space, and like I said, I've seen so many of the younger generations, I would say that what their work needs to be is, I don't want to say defending culture, because many conservatives would probably argue that it's silly to defend something like, saying cis or saying ratchet or ghetto. But I do think that you can go about it in a respectful way that communicates that this is not something you're going to allow. Right. And when I say this is not something you're going to allow, I'm talking about disapproval. Right. What you don't understand from a historical context is that whenever white Americans are integrated in Black spaces, there will always be cultural appropriation, and all the ways in which, your white coworker can say cis and ratchet and all these different things. Right. Whatever it is they want to use, whatever it is, whatever reference, they're essentially able to talk out of line. They're essentially able to, really portrayed this certain aspect of, Black culture, which is more lax, which may be more playful, in the workspace, for example. And, they can get away with that. Nobody's going to bat an eye, right? Because they're gay or whatever the case may be. However they identify, mostly obviously it's gay. It's okay. But for you don't get the same privilege. So I think for a lot of younger people who are integrated in these spaces with white people, I think your duty and your role, your responsibility at this point is to talk about what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. You know what I mean? You don't always have to be like, girl, I don't like that you're trying to put braids in your hair or twisties in your hair. You know what I mean? I don't like that. But what you can do is not be so approving. You don't have to be like, oh, I love that, or, oh, no. Because what are we doing? Right? Because if you go to put the twisties and the braids and all these things in your hair, I mean, today it's fine. But don't forget. And if you forgot, then you need to ask the people who've come before you, because they didn't forget. I remember clear as day, those white girls up at that job teasing me. Customers coming up to the register, mistreating me as if my nails you would have thought my nails was giving, the extendo clip girl nails. And that's not even giving that. They didn't give that. They were just a little bit of length. I just happen to be Black, all right, at a different time. And so, and it sounds like a silly thing. You might say, well, that is, ratchet or whatever. It doesn't matter. I was young at the time. It's creative expression for some women. Everybody's not trying to be a follower, and it's what we do as Black African-American people. We reinvent things. Okay. So it was creativity then, and it was self-expression, and it wasn't received as that. I received a lot of racial backlash because of that. You know what I mean? And it wasn't just that. It's even still today, right? Being in academic circles, right? It's always the thing of low expectations, right? It's the thing of like, you share with your advisor, had these experiences before, right? You share with your academic advisor, this is your plans for the future. This is where you want to go within your academic career. And their job being to advise you, they often take that as an opportunity to discourage you. Right? Regardless of what the circumstances may be, right? Well, one, actually, I can't say regardless, because that's everything, right? For many white Americans, not all, But for many white Americans, especially those who are college educated, there's a white bonus, right? And Tracy McMillan talks about this in her book, The White Bonus, right? So even though, white Americans face hardship, there is still economic advantages that they have, right? That African Americans and other minorities do not have, right? And I'm not even going to say other minorities, because I actually think that Africans and other immigrants have advantages that African Americans don't have, right? And a lot of times that is being integrated and accepted in those white social circles. You know what I mean? I think that white Americans are more receptive of an African than they are of Black people. And I've seen this in my own life. I've actually had Africans defend white Americans in regards to certain conversations, right? Political conversations and things like that, because they feel like, they weren't accepted by the Black community or whatever the case may be. And I don't want to take away from that. That's a conversation for another day. I don't want to be insensitive, but I also don't want to veer, right? So at the end of the day, like I said, I think you can communicate disapproval. And I think that's important because, the thing is, if you don't, and I think this is, you might say this is what the conservative agenda is, or this is what the agenda of the multiracial, combustion thing that we're kind of popping off here, what that is. But it's just to be able to say, I don't know where that comes from, right? Like, and I think if you can take, AAV and you can take Black culture and you can, you can put it in the hands of anybody who wants to kind of dabble in it, then you can say in the next few years, there is no such thing as Black culture, right? There is no such thing as Black people. And if you get rid of, certain monuments like the Smithsonian Museum, right? Like if you get rid of the history, if you erase the progress, right, then you don't know about the Harlem Renaissance. You don't have the context. So you can't say to the white person who's wearing the braids or who's, dibbling and dabbling in your culture, who may even be calling you the N-word in a playful manner, right? You can't say, this is Black culture. What are you doing? Right? It's going to be, well, what are you talking about? This is where, where did this come from? Right? And I hate to use such mundane and what really seems like silly examples, like, using the N-word as playful. I hate to use those examples, but I think I'm just trying to give context, right, to understand what will take place if this younger generation doesn't get educated about their history and get educated about Black culture while, being integrated into white spaces, right? You see Black girls, hanging out with the white girls, and the Black girls want to be like the white girls, and it's like, well, hold on, wait a minute now. My only thing was always this, right? And this is even for my piece that I wrote and I referenced earlier in this podcast. We can all get along. That's fine. But I'm not going to erase myself to be in these spaces. And I'm not going to be here laying down, right, in continuous servitude to make anybody else happy, right? I'm not going to be here to be the emotional regulator or to make anybody else comfortable. No, I'm going to stand strong in my Blackness. And when you say, what is standing strong in your Blackness? It's the opposite of being humiliated for years, right? It's the opposite of humiliation. It's the opposite of torment, right? It's dignity. It's pride, right? I think it's Toni Morrison who says it's a miracle that any of us are even still here after all that we have endured as African American people. Come on now, Cincinnati radiation studies. You know how many African Americans have died? You know how many of us have died due to so many different tests and studies and scientific and medicinal malpractices? Just outside from the communal harm. That doesn't always come from gun violence, although I did reference a book I'm reading about that, right? But sometimes it comes from, just environmental harm, pollutants, right? Poor air quality, data centers, like all these different things. So it is a miracle, quite frankly, right? You look at the descendants of Katrina, right? Ninth Ward, come on. And we're still here. Do you see how those people were treated? Don't tell me. Don't sit here and talk. Don't try to brush over it. And that's exactly what they're trying to do today. They want to paint a pretty picture over it. So you sit here and you hang out with your white friends and you don't quite understand why, the Black girl over there in the corner is side-eyeing. And, you just feel like she just has an attitude problem because that's a Black woman's thing. You see, that's how you're going to start thinking about things and thinking about other Black people if you don't have the education. So it's important to be educated. I don't care how you have to get it. Actually, I do. Let's not go too far. I was getting a little hype. It matters. It matters. If you want to ask me, I think it's always best to start with some very digestible context. I think Bell Hooks is such a brilliant writer. She takes very complex subjects, right? And she takes, bevies of history, and everything that's taken place within this country and the lives of Black people. And she simplifies it in such a philosophical and almost like a poetic way. It's very beautiful. Her bodies of work is incredible. An amazing African-American philosopher. Did you even know that Black people could be philosophers? Did you even hear about anybody? Have you ever heard of any Black philosophers? No, you haven't. Did you know that many of the slaves actually influenced Thomas Jefferson's ideologies? Did you know that? Yeah. Yes, they did. So we were always there, and the work is not forgetting that. So I need this younger generation to not forget that. Do not forget where we come from. Don't forget. And if you forgot, you need to ask your aunties and your uncles. Ask your mama. Ask your granny. Ask your cousin. You see what I'm saying? The problem is, and I think when you talk about communication within the Black community, I know right now we are being so heavily influenced by Western psychology and, therapeutic practices. But I mean, man, just having a conversation and getting curious about people's lives and their experiences. My mother tells a story of how, she was a nurse. She was a, nurse. She was working as a nurse. She is a nurse, but she was working as a nurse. And in her early days of practice, she said that she remembered patients saying, hey, no, I don't want a Black nurse. Right. She said she remembers her supervisor saying that little colored girl. I remember when I worked as a pharmacy technician, and this actually made me pivot. Right. I talk about this a little bit, but my father wanted me to go to school to be a doctor. But I decided not to do that. But at the time, in my early, years of accumulating experience within the medical field, I worked as a pharmacy technician. And I remember, counting pills and being accused of miscounting, being, hovered over. Right. And, my work always being questioned, like I couldn't count, like I was, just really treated as though I was inadequate by women around me who had been there for years, who had never advanced, right? Never went on to actually become pharmacists, right? Just white entitled women who felt like this field, right? This level of profession was for them and them only. I endured so much at that job. It was quite literally torment. I remember telling my supervisor, I said, I can't do this anymore. And it wasn't just from the white individuals. Unfortunately, I did have an experience with a sister who was hating. And she was hating, I ain't gonna go there. But, and I remember my white supervisor telling me that I should quit. Yeah, that was it. Hey. Right. There's been times I've worked for employers and I've dealt with racial discrimination, reported it to HR and experienced retaliation, or no outcomes at all. You see what I'm saying? So the work is not done. And I tell people this all the time, if you think that you're going to integrate yourself into these white spaces and you think you're going to adopt some type of conservative ideology, some type of conservative persona, if you think you're going to adopt some type of right wing, right, any type of manner, right? And how you dress and how you show up. And you think that's going to grant you acceptance. You are incredibly ignorant and you are deluding yourself, right? To be willfully ignorant and to ignore the history and to choose to look at what you want to look at is the perfect recipe for a toxic relationship. Let's talk about it. Right? Because we're so quick to talk about the red flags, what to see here, what to see there, but we don't quite recognize that red flags can show up in a multitude of ways. And it's not just in our relational romantic dynamics. No, it's in every dynamic when you're dealing with such persons, right? We talk about the toxic workplace. But what about toxic ideology? What about toxic environments, right? That require African Americans to adopt some type of ideology that does not serve or align them and never has. All in the name of what? Being accepted, being called, an upstanding Negro. You're not like the others, right? When you think about a lot of the conservative movements, right? Blexit, that's actually touring HBCUs. What exactly are they asking of you? Because to my understanding, most college educated African-American people are very conservative. Hello, we just seen Martha's Vineyard, right? So to have a movement that is geared in what? Trying to influence young African Americans to do what specifically? Because to me, this sounds like nothing but ignorance. And if it's not evident to you, it's nothing more than a racial movement designed to brainwash, to defer the narrative. All right. And to what? I don't know. serpent, African Americans influence, because we know that we're very influential people. So what is the movement designed to do? Right. And that's one of the things I never understood, why people found Candace Owens to be so compelling. She's so incredibly ignorant. You're going to take this one black woman who doesn't know anything who knows nothing about black people, who has a fundamental belief that we are all ratchet. And you find this person you think she's intelligent? What? Because she doesn't stutter? Because she can read a teleprompter? Because she went to school for journalism, dropped out, but went to school for journalism, maybe got a few skills in communications? You think that this person is what? Intelligent? What exactly is she arguing outside of sheer arrogance and confidence? You see, that's the thing about narcissism and people who are so narrow-minded, so ignorant, so incredibly self-serving. They're incredibly confident. And you have to be. If you repeat something over and over and over again, you start to believe the lie. She was a Ruby Bridges. All right. And I ain't going to compare her to Ruby. But I'm saying, as a young girl who had the NAACP come to her to serve as a guide, perhaps maybe even a lifeline for her racial discrimination, and then she just goes far right, that's nothing more than a self-hating Negro. And you need to know about those. Some people call them coons back in the day. We've always had sellouts. We've always had traitors. But understand what this is. And understand the dangers of persons who are in influence, who are in positions of influence and who have resources. Just because a person has resources, and that's her entire chief aim. I have resources because I'm aligned with white Americans in racist ideology. So I have resources because I align myself with racist, because I align myself with those who, see African Americans as inhumane, as intolerable, as incompetent, as insufferable. Now I get access to the white bonus, right? I get access to the rooms and the resources. And if I tasted hell, if I tasted the sufferings of what it is to be an African American person, I can't go back. I don't want to go back, right? She's adopted. She doesn't have family. Understand who you're dealing with here. You see what I'm saying? Understand who you're dealing with. This is someone who's an implant. She has no roots. And despite the seedlings that were planted, here she is today. You see what I'm saying? So one thing I will say about people, you talk about this, super politically charged nation, which has always been that way. America has always been incredibly politically charged. With the death of Kirk, I just don't know what is the fate of Candace Owens, right? What is the outcome of this type of movement? Because it's not unification. It's not love, right? And if you don't know, Dr. King was actually shot and murdered, rather, okay, for preaching love. JFK shot and murdered for preaching, and I'm not going to say he was a saint because I don't, but overall, you see what I'm saying? And so understand what's taking place here. It's not the same, right? Like, I need people to know that this is not the same. Kirk was not Kennedy. Kirk was not MLK. Okay. He was not Kennedy. He was not King. All right. And neither is Owens. These are not people who are for unification. No, this is about standing on the backs of African Americans and doing it through harmful rhetoric, toxic ideology, right? In order to uplift oneself. Okay. That is the very foundation of white supremacy. Do you understand that? And if you don't understand it, you need to play it back because you need to understand it. And I'm explaining it in the most simplistic way. And this is important because I just think it's too much of this today. I don't know what y'all doing, what y'all thinking, whose Kool-Aid you're sipping, but you're going down the wrong path. All right. And it's so incredibly easy to market to such individuals who don't have access and who do not have. And this has really been this has been the ways in which they've been able to get us to do many different things, right? To sell all our own, to put toxic, music or whatever the case may be into our environments, or whatever they need to do, right? This has always been the gateway. When you take persons who have been deprived, not because of their own, lack of will, right? But because of systemic barriers, because of institutional discrimination, all right? Because of racist ideologies and biases that permeate the minds of many directors and persons of power and influence, right? Then you are absolutely going to get a byproduct of a multitude of individuals, right, who are disenfranchised. So understand what's taking place here. And I think it was really good that we spoke about Blexit, because I just think you have too many people today who are like way too curious about what's going on here, right? That's exactly what it is. And what is the payoff? Oh, you can be rich like me. Okay, so if that's the payoff, then why are we dissing the Cardi B's and the other people who are putting harmful things in our communities? Why are we dissing that? And the worst thing about, people who are, in positions of power and who are incredibly influential, like I said, you repeat something a million times, you're going to start to believe it. So Owens actually believes she's helping Black people. Where are you getting this ideology, or this belief rather, that a vast majority of us are victims? Where are you getting that? Just, y'all will call Black people victims, and y'all will think that we are victims just because we don't have a lot of money. Do you not understand that only African American people are equated to self-worth being equated to our bank accounts? And we are the only group that is so economically disenfranchised and has been disenfranchised for years, for centuries, for decades. You know what I mean? Like, we're the only group that has that. No other group has that. And take it down to the very basic level. I tell you guys all the time, you sit here and you listen to all these relationship podcasts and everybody's arguing about who got money, the broke man, the broke woman, the BBL, the high-rise apartment, the Birkin bag, the Mercedes, the whatever, like all these status symbols. White people do not have that. Y'all don't put these burdens on white people. Y'all don't put these burdens on Mexican people. Mexican man can work, and he's a farmer in the field of agriculture, and he's a hardworking man for $17 an hour. Oh my God, we're so grateful. When they were showing those videos about, with ICE coming in and taking some of the farmers. Oh my God, we're so grateful. These are hardworking men, blah, blah, blah. White man can work at FedEx, come home, get a good plate, ain't got to go online and hear how he's a bum and he's this and he's broke and blah, blah, blah. Black man is the only man in this country, that is degraded, that is disrespected and dehumanized because of his inability to generate a certain amount of income that he doesn't have access to. On average, that he does not have access to, on average. You think about college. And I know if you go to college, and if you've gone on the straight and narrow, right? When I say straight and narrow, I mean, you've been someone, you've went to college, and you were very blessed to be able to go to college right out of high school. Perhaps you went to a school that was college prep, whatever the case may be, whatever resources you may have had, maybe even just having someone sit down with you, fill out the application, right? I don't think people realize how bad it is at public schools. It's terrible. Okay, it's terrible. It's quite frankly, literally a daycare. Your teacher is changing every day. You don't know who's going to be, it's different lesson plans. They're giving you a worksheet today. Nobody knows how to do the worksheet, right? You having a sub every day. Sometimes you're having a teacher from another class come in and sit it's horrible. The gym teacher's in here. Nobody can help you with the homework. All right. It's chaos throughout the entire semester. You're in here with some kids who just don't know no better, kids who are just, it's horrible. Okay. The principal's not keeping track. We don't know what the principal's doing all day, but it ain't making no changes. The funding is held up. We don't know why there's millions of dollars that's not being put to use. We don't know. It's crazy. I'm telling you right now, public schools is crazy. It's crazy. All right. And so when you start talking about college, that is such a far fetch for so many young Black kids and so many young people who go, I'm going to say Black kids. Yes. For so many Black kids who go to public schools. And it sounds like, how can that be? Especially if you are somebody who's educated and you have had the privilege to go to college, you don't recognize the privilege in that. You can't see it. Why you can't see it? Because you ain't never had to experience. You haven't had any other experiences. You see what I'm saying? So it's never as simple as just go to college. It's not. Because even if you could just go to college, you have to have time management skills. All right. And let me also just talk about how I said, we spoke about, racist and biased and discriminatory advisors who discourage your dreams, who tell you you can't do it. Right. And maybe if they're not being racist, they're incredibly discriminatory. Right. It's these white Americans, with the PhDs and the master degrees who are, in your advising office, right, in your financial aid office, because they've never had to face the type of barriers and overcome the circumstances and obstacles that you have had to overcome. So when you walk into this room and you're the only one, you don't have parents checking in or, anything like that, and you tell them, hey, I want to do this, instead of them saying, hey, listen, this is how you can get there, they're going to say, you got this going on, you work there, you can't do full time, whatever. You're not your average 18-year-old, 22-year-old college kid whose parents just set up the dorm and, you've got this check coming in from $5,000 from your parents, whatever the case may be. They're going to tell you it's not possible. You're a mother, you're a father. They're going to say, oh, no, you can't do that. Despite the fact that they might be a mother or a father and they are in school getting their PhD now, right? They're going to tell you, no, right? Because that is the racial barrier that will always persist, okay, within the lives of white Americans when it comes to Black people. They can do it, but you cannot do it. That's why when you enter into certain spaces, whether it be professional spaces, predominantly professional spaces, they're going to discredit you. They're going to challenge your intellect, right? Because in their minds, they are capable and competent. You are delinquent. You are not capable, right? You are not capable. That's why Candace Owens is on this entire movement, completely disregarding the lives of individuals, right? The histories, the legacies, all right, of African Americans who are who have Harvard, Ivy League grads, Spelman grads, right? She doesn't want, you know why she can't sit in those rooms with those women? Because she's not honorable. She's dishonorable. She's dishonorable to the very people that she claims that she's, trying to help other Black people be like. She's a fake. All right. She's the counterfeit. Right. If you really want to talk about class and professionalism and you want to talk about conservative values and family, look at the Black family from Spelman that's kept the family and kept things in generations. All right. And I'm referencing the Martha's Vineyard documentary with Ralph Lauren. Look at that. Look at those families. Research those families. All right. Research the families out in California, African-American families of the vineyards. All right. The sommeliers. Look at those families. Don't look at over here what's going on down here in the 6th Ward. Don't look at that. And I'm not even from Louisiana, so let me not go there. But don't look at what's going on in your local urban area. All right. That's not the representation of all of us. That's just the ones who, unfortunately, we didn't make it. Sorry, folks. I know y'all don't want to believe it, but yeah, there are poor people in every community, right? I mean, it's more Black people that are poor than it is, but look, hey, they're everywhere. You're always going to have those quote unquote rejects. You're always going to have people who choose to do drugs or whatever. That's not a Black thing. You see what I'm saying? So, in summary, Candace Owens can't hang with the girls. All right. She's not seeing them. She's not seeing your Spelman grads. Okay. She didn't even come on now. And this is where we have to get a little elitist, right? Because she wants to be the classist. She wants to be the domineering head chick, head boss. She's playing the wrong field, completely in the wrong league with the wrong messages, doing a dance of blackface. All right. She looks absolutely ridiculous. And any woman in any family who has that legacy of wealth, okay, of conservative values, there is none of that, baby mama culture, like as you guys like to say. All right. Y'all not talking about them. Why? Because they're not on they don't care to be in the news. They're not on the front page. They're not your celebrities. All right. And I'm not talking about that for Black people. I'm talking about that for all people. You understand? White people only know Black people through the media. All right. They've never had to sit in the same rooms with us, share the same spaces as us. Hello. Segregation, whites only. All right. Just because they removed the sign doesn't mean that the principle does not apply. You enter into these private schools. Why do you think there is so many of white kids? Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because what? Black kids aren't capable, or you just think we're fundamentally flawed? I mean, what do you think? It's access, baby. Privilege. Okay? White bonus. White bonus. All right? So understand that. And when you understand that, you can start to figure out where do you go from here. And, the piece of encouragement that I would leave for any Black person on the other end of this is like, man, we have a long way to go. And that's why it's so important for you to know your history, because when you start to wake up and know it, and you start to understand what's going on and what has taken place, you can stop feeling so out of place. You can start your momentum will come from not trying to prove to white people that you're worthy, not trying to be accepted by white people, but saying, I got to move this thing forward. All right. Because I walk into a room and I'm one, but I'm standing as 10,000. Right. It's a whole lineage of people who didn't get to do what you're doing, who couldn't be where you were, didn't even know how to read, wanted to learn how to read books, had nobody to teach them. Do you understand that? Do you understand the violence that your ancestors, and I don't want to get to, I'm not saying ancestors from a spiritual standpoint. I'm just saying those who've come before you. Do you know how much violence that they've had to endure? You see what I'm saying? Like, come on now, talk about the history, and y'all don't want to talk about it. And why? I don't know. You walk into any white community, right? We know these very, big old houses, big old mansions. You see all these antiques and this ugly European furniture, right? That's their ancestors. That's the inheritance of those who've come before them. And one of the things that I think that white Americans are so dishonest about is their history. Right? They don't want to see themselves as a separate culture, which they are. They don't want to acknowledge their history. They don't want to acknowledge the fact that, yeah, granddaddy was a racist. And, oh, yeah, we can trace it down to, Charles III. And, yeah, he had slaves. Yeah. And I remember Betty. Yeah, she used to teach us how to read and be with us while mother and father would go off and run the businesses. They don't want to tell you these stories, but they're looking at you dead in your face when you show up to that private school or when you show up to that university or that advising office. And they're like, what do I think of this person? That my grandfather still says is incompetent, that my grandfather still says is this and that, and, calls them the hard ER. You see what I'm saying? Like, you have to realize this is not back in the day. This is today. This is today. Okay. This is today. And there are so many African-American families who possess all of those things and are highly educated and would never get up here and create a movement called Blexit with freaking Turning Point USA. What are you doing? Ignorance at its finest. She's a buck. There is nothing classy about that woman. There is nothing intelligent about that woman. She is absolutely nothing that you want to be. She hates herself. And when she goes home at night, she's probably made enough money at this point she can convince herself. But child, I just think there's really a spiritual principle to it all. And there's just no way it could be well with your soul for the things that you do. You got to answer to that. So this is a bit of a passionate episode, but I think you get my gist. And I think you now understand the importance of why we talk about race. Had someone say to me, and this is an older gentleman, 35, 36 years old. Why is everything always about race with you? Everything is about race. Why? Because of the caste system, because they designed it to be that way. Don't look at me. I'm just within the system, baby. Don't look at me. I'm not the one who invented this. I'm not the one who invented this. All right. I had a friend, 7th grade, white girl. We was cool. We was tight. But then as we got older, things kind of got murky. Why are, in the AP classes, why all the white kids in the AP classes? Why are all the white kids on one side of the cafeteria and it's not many of them? Why are all the white kids upstairs eating lunch and having takeout and being able to get in their cars and go get lunch? And, what's up with that? What's up with all these different privileges? What's going on here? It's a difference. You see what I mean? You get older and you start to realize that, wait a minute, it's not that I'm racist. It's not that there's something wrong with my friend. It's not nothing wrong with Becky. But hold on, wait a minute now. We ain't getting treated the same. What's up with that? And Becky ain't saying nothing. Becky is not saying anything. She's not telling me what's up with that. She sees it, though. She knows that something's up with that. So what? Becky thinks she's better? Is Becky entitled? Is that why Becky doesn't say anything? Is that why, she wants to be my friend down on the, in the track field, but she doesn't want, she don't want to talk about X, Y, and Z. She don't want to talk about how her homegirl just came over here and asked me if my, was real and, what's up with that? Come on now. Talk about allegiance. What's up with that? All right? Because if anybody's going to be in this plight, honey, you got to be willing to do the right thing. All right. You got to be willing to stand up for what's right. OK, if you're going to be down, if you're going to be in your community, that's my only requirement for y'all who are integrating with these, with white Americans. All right. You want to be bestie. All right. Do they have your back, bestie, or what? Are they silent? Because a lot of times you're going to find out, hey, wait a minute, you thought y'all was friends. Wait a minute, they silent. Come to find out, her grandfather was a Klansman. She didn't tell you that. She didn't tell you that. But here you are up in their house and you're mad because your mama couldn't afford to get you a stable. Your mama can't afford horses. What? Because she what? What? Because she what? She had a couple kids or what? You see what I'm saying? And then you start to turn it on yourself. But you never questioned why Becky's grandfather was a Klansman and she ain't say nothing. And she invited you over for dinner. What are we doing? What are we doing? Okay? Understand the history. Understand that for all of the grotesque things, there was somebody standing on the opposite side of that. Okay? There was somebody throwing things at them on the Montgomery bus boycott. Okay? There was somebody there. There was somebody there on the other side with the guns. There was somebody there. Hello, what do you think happened to those people who were on the opposite side of freedom? What do you think happened to them? Did you think they all just died, or what do you think? What do you think? There was somebody there pulling the hair and spitting on the black kids sitting at the diner. There was somebody there. There was somebody there. Hello, are you listening? Let me not because I get passionate. I don't want to get condescending. I'm getting a little passionate. My apologies. But if you made it this far, I'm glad you did. And I hope you take something from this. I think this is a very important lesson. I think it's a very important time, right? Because if people can forget, then again, the one who has the pen and the power and the resources gets to control the narrative, right? So that's what it's been this entire time through history. White Americans and those who have oppressed others, who have harmed others, have always controlled the narrative. And that's why we don't know sometimes where history comes from. And we can be, swept up in figures like Candace Owens and the Blexit movement and Turning Point USA. And we can adopt right-wing ideology despite them deliberately, spewing racial and hateful rhetoric about your own kind, So it's important that you know that. Don't depart from it. All right. And I'm not trying to get all scriptural, I'm just saying don't depart from it. 35-year-old man. Why is everything about race? Unfortunately, he went to a public school. He was not a college graduate, so unfortunately for him, the educational piece was not there. Right. And I think for so many people, after so long of self-hate, so much self-hate, right, as persons are, indebted, right? And in so much poverty, right? That comes self-hate. That comes with a lack of dignity, right? It strips you of your pride, your ability to, right? Low expectations, all these different things. And if someone puts in front of you, well, the solution is this. The solution is to be white, right? Then you're going to work hard to try to be that. Right. You're not going to seek justification. Some people look around and say, wait a minute now, why are all the black people over here? Or why is it only a few black people that, go there? And what's going on? Why is all, some people do that and they get to find answers and they say, oh, wait a minute now. This gap has always been a big one. Right. And then some people, they look around and they get to saying, oh, why is all the black people? Why is all the white people? I want to be white. I want to be white. I want to be like them. If I could just be like them and get like them and be in their rooms, and then I can get that. I hate being around these black people. Oh my God. And I remember what such and such did to me. And I remember what such and such did to me. But you turn around and turn a blind eye, to how they looked at you and treated you and how they, so, and it's not just, it's a person to person basis, right? Good people, bad people. It doesn't matter. That doesn't matter the race, unfortunately, but it's the truth, good people, bad people. But understand that at the end of the day, it's a case by case basis, right? Very simplistically. And I would actually argue rudimentary, right? This is elementary. Okay. There's good and bad people in the world, but understand that regardless if you depart from the wisdom and the knowledge, and I'm about to wrap up here, regardless if you depart from the wisdom and the knowledge and the history, right? If you depart from the context, if you are choosing to be willfully ignorant, that context will never depart from you. All right. So at the end of the day, you can enter into these right rooms, right? You can enter into these white rooms and these white spaces and you can, do your thing, you do your dance, do your thing. But You're the only person who doesn't know. You're the only person who doesn't know. So what? So what? You think your only leverage is economic? Well, that's not going to happen. Right? It's your mind. It's your mind. It's knowledge. Knowledge is power. Peace, y'all.